Baneen, just the person I want to see. Let me try and hi. Let me try and get you on board. Yes. This is amazing timing. Baneen.
Hi. Yes.
More important than Abda, I have to listen to you.
Oh God.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, so you.
Can
This
hear
is
you.
fantastic.
Yes, this is. I hope this is what. Can you hear me clearly?
I can hear you in multiple languages. One of the topics for today is going to be the languages. So,
Yes.
um, Acha, as these people are sort of
Joining
catching
in.
on,
Yeah.
yeah, let them join in. They will give it a few minutes. I just wanted to quickly do a recap with you. So this is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is live chat number 11. And you and I are basically going to be picking up from what Jean left us on Monday. And we talked about a bunch of different. She talked about a bunch of different things, which was about connecting the earth to our consciousness, these
Yes.
sacred buildings that are built from the earth. There was a lot of conversation about the relationship between us and the earth and collapsing of time and space. And of course, all of that is sort of the bigger context for where heritage lies. And I thought it'd be really nice if we could pick up on some of those things and talk about it in terms of what you do and how you got there. And obviously, I'd like to frame it also in what I do. So, if we could have that kind of like dialogue to kind of unpack and unwrap all the sort of very heavy ideas that she left us with, because she's back again on Monday, right? She's back again
Okay.
on Monday to have another. So, we're going to do a series with Jean Gardner. Every Monday, Jean will come on at 4 o'clock at this time. And then on the Thursdays, we will have a live chat with another guest. Like you're our first guest on that series of guests. And then next week we'll have somebody else, and then Thursday after that we'll have somebody else. But Jean will basically lay the fluid thought process for what the discussions will be every time she comes back on board on Mondays. And most likely she will listen to what we have to say here and pick up on it.
So, I mean, Jean, she said so many things, but of course, the way it all sort of rounded back to the human body and sort of the body of the earth was probably most
Yeah.
exciting for me. And I think for both Cube editors and for Khanabadosh Baithak, this kind of connection with nature and earth and places and sort of the physicality of being somewhere plays a huge role in what both of us do. Learning about cultures, about even for example, when we cook in at Khanabadosh Baithak at the cafe, what grows at a certain place, and just yeah. So that was where it sort of hit, sort of really sort of stayed with me, that thought, and so yeah, I guess
So
that's
hold
what I'm
that thought.
thinking.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. Time out. Hold that
Yes.
thought. Hold that thought. Zulfi, welcome from Chitral. I hope you're well and safe. So first of all, friends, editor community, I'd like you to welcome a dear friend of mine. Baneen Mirza is one of the founders for Khanabadosh Baithak. She's our honorable guest for today. For me, it's a real pleasure to be able to have this kind of work-related conversation with her, because Baneen and I talk about everything else mostly other than work, which is thrown in once in a while. Baneen will be talking to us about, as she's already sort of spilled the beans and let the cat out of the bag, about her impressions and responses, because I won't use the word reactions, responses to what Jean Gardner mentioned the other day. But the thing that makes Baneen and her work at Khanabadosh Baithak absolutely unique and magical and special and something really sort of poetic is the idea of how they have managed to create something that is nomadic, that's from the earth. It breaks all rules, breaks all boundaries, and yet it continues to function in this very perfect, very fragile and delicately architected ecosystem that Baneen has set up. I'm going to be very careful about my use of words, especially words like structure and format and anything that would be slightly nerve-wracking within the framework of these conversations. So Baneen, welcome. Thank you so much for your time. It
Thank
really
you.
is an honor to have you here and talk about you and your work for change in a sort of global audience. As you know, we have people that sign up from all over the world, and it's really nice
Yes.
to have access to that kind of international diaspora. So first of all, what I'd like you to do, please, is apart from your accolades of an Indus Valley distinction student and then a student of creative writing from the Royal College of Art, can you just briefly tell our audience how Khanabadosh Baithak started, what it means in terms of its own linguistics, and what it means in terms of its spirit for you and Ahmed? Create that
So,
context, understand where you're coming from when you then get into Gene Gardner stuff.
yeah, I think, I mean, Khanabadosh does a lot of things, which is something that we're sort of trying to understand along the way. But where we really started was, I think, just two things mainly. Both me and Ahmed, there was a desire to maybe for a slow life of sorts. So we live somewhere where we're connected to nature. We're not sort of um, closed in these concrete boxes. So we go out and we look at sort of structures outside capitalism and consumerism. So that was just sort of a preoccupation. And the second thing was to be to live a life more culturally rooted, if you will. And there's so much to know and learn about um, our music and our literature and our history that and for us the one way to explore that was of course travel. So we started traveling by ourselves first, and then we thought to open up those experiences and sort of create a platform to share that experience with others, which is where the campsite and the cafe comes in. And of course it's, and like nomads, we sort of seasonally migrate. So in the summers we're in the mountains. We've worked in Shigar for 3 years, 2 years, and then moved to Hulkin Hunza for a year. And in winters, so far, we don't have a base, but we have traveled across Sindh and Tharparkar and, looking for, again, things that make up our identity, but we aren't really aware of or know at all. So just that curiosity is what drove us. So then we started, like, we wanted people to come and A, experience that, and B, ideally hope for, if I can say, a cultural trade of sorts, where the residents of that place, wherever we base ourselves, wherever we settle for that season, them and the visitors can maybe come together and create something. And just, I don't know, yeah, that's basically how it started. But because again we've spent a lot of times in the mountains and staying close to nature, and that has been most sort of very important to Baithak also. So yeah, before I start
So, I mean,
rambling, broadly what it is.
you have just mentioned so many variables, right? For instance, one variable is seasonal, that you move.
Yeah.
So you will move like the old hunter-gatherers in that sense. You will move your livestock, you will move where the weather gets better, you will move to some
Yes.
place where the herds will have grasses to eat, and then you will set up camp, and then you will build a transient short-term community. And if
Yeah.
you're close to some place that has water, which you obviously have to be, there's bound to be another existing community that's already there. Potentially
Yeah.
not hunters and gatherers, but settlers who live there, like a rural community.
Yes.
So you don't know how they will accept you. You don't know what your relationship with them be, how to negotiate. So that's the second set of unknowns, right? The first set is you will move from point A to point B. What will that point be? What will happen en route? Once you decide that, okay, this is where I'm going to set up camp for a short amount of time, what will happen there? Then you don't know in terms of the exploration of how that community will respond to you, or what information they will share, what they will not want to share, what their resistance and reservations will be,
Yeah.
and then what you get out of it. So how do you manage this continuous constant set of unknowns? So what's constant in your work is the unknown.
Yes.
You don't know what will happen the next month or the month after. At the Baithak, you don't know who will show up, what musicians will show up, what conversation will be released. And although the overall feel of it is a slowness, correct me if I'm wrong, is a very, 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 very sort of slow motion absorption of the environment, whether it's nature or the rustling of the leaves or the change in the weather or the conversations of passers-by or people who respond differently to the food. The food is a huge element in your work at the Baithak, and of course is the music. But they're all variables. How do you work with that? And again, keeping in mind what Jean had said about the relationship of our body with the earth and the relationship of our body with the universe and the cosmos, right? So there's us sandwiched between these two things, and there's you guys doing this very amorphous dance-like maneuver, calling it life, where nothing is bound, nothing is controlled, nothing is known. How do you navigate through that? If I've described it correctly.
Yes, you have. There's really, I think that is the journey that we're on, really, and sometimes I call it a willful disorientation, where we've done this to ourselves deliberately, not quite
Yeah.
knowing what will come out of it, which is the beauty of it, and we end up sort of gathering a sort of community of people who are like-minded, who are also sort of feeling similar things, and which is why this idea of sort of feeling it in your gut and in your heart, what to do next, how to go about it. So for instance, right now with the pandemic and the lockdown, we really don't know what's next. We don't know how this will pan out for us in terms of the land that we've leased, where we have the campsite currently, or had last year. But we know that it will work out. There's sort of a broad, just sort of, I don't know how to describe it. We really just, things, I guess the journey sort of unfolds itself. I don't think there's a defined structure that even we can work out, except just this like I said, willful disorientation, and sort of going with the flow itself is everything, with just a few sort of. So for instance, the fact that we have a campsite and there is food and there's music, I think these three, that people come and stay with us. It's temporary, whatever setup we have. We build with what ingredients we have in that area, and whatever music is being played either there, or whatever influences sort of people bring or the visitors bring. So broadly around these things, everything else sort of just weaves itself in. So and for that, I think sort of finding your own center as the people who are sort of running it, and the broadest of the community that has now started building up, that guides the process. There's no other sort of curriculum other than that.
Do you think listening to you, and this really gives me so much joy. It really gives me so much joy, because I think you and I had this conversation when Khanabadosh Baithak was a concept, when Ahmed and I had first met, and you guys had just embarked on it before we did the Edu Tour up in Shigar, and that crazy 22-hour journey I still have to share with the people, where you were the one person who said he is going to show up for breakfast. If he said he's going to show up for breakfast, believe me, he's not spending the night anywhere. So that's a great story to share. But, I'm just listening to your process again so many years later, where you've been through years of experience, you've had your hardships, you've had your successes, you've had your magical moments, some that we've shared. But that community that you described, do you think that community is a revival or a heritage community? This is how people would have lived 6,000 years ago. Do you think this is how my favorite the Syrians that I talk about all the time, do you think people coming through who came down and they settled around the river Indus, do you think this would have been their kind of lifestyle pre-digital, where the relationship with the earth and what the earth had to offer us, you call them ingredients? So like a recipe for life, whether it's how we build or what we wear or what we eat, or how we decide what our day is going to be like, where you look at the sky and say, okay, it's a clear day, we'll go out. Okay, it's a rainy, cold day, we'll stay indoors. So you don't really have a plan for even the next few hours, let alone months and years, which is a very capitalist way of saying, here's my short-term plan, here's my long-term plan, here's a quarterly plan. Oh my God, that's so suffocating, just thinking about those kinds of imposed structures. And Jean talked about that. She talked about how she woke up to the birds, even though it was dark, and the clock said. Sorry, there was some kind of a loss in connection between.
Now I
So,
can.
do you think your community is what the kind of community that you are organically creating through the three brains, the brain, the heart, and the intuition? These are the three brains that Jean mentioned. That do you
Yes.
think the community you're creating is kind of a revival of a heritage community, something really, really old that we've lost en route?
I think so. I mean, maybe we haven't consciously done that, but that is the idea, and that is what we sort of want to explore for ourselves also. It's not always a smooth ride. It's very scary as well,
Yeah, must be.
where you don't
Must
have a plan. And having born into families, middle class families, where you have to have a plan and a job, and like things
be. Yeah,
have to be, stability is everything.
right,
And
right.
this is a very unstable way of life, um, yet very liberating also, where you know like you said, ingredients, those ingredients will actually give you a recipe for life, what you wear, what you do through the day. Like, I do think so. I mean, before internet, before international tourism and all of these things, this is how people lived, and this is what it means to sort of when you sort of addressing context when you're building, in terms of architecture, etc. as well. So yeah, I do think this is how they
अरे बाप
used to live.
ये
This could be.
ये रेसिपी के अल्फाज आपके हैं बीबी, मैंने नहीं, मैं तो
No,
सिर्फ
no,
फॉलो
in the
कर
sense like a recipe for life. That wasn't my term.
yeah.
But in terms of like what is there, like what you
Yeah,
have, instead of trying
right.
to, because of course with Khanabadosh Baithak, I keep telling everybody I never had a passion for cooking. But of course, when I had to do it, I was interested in what is around me. It was a very basic, no fancy, no sort of again, nothing planned behind it. We just had very little resources, and we didn't want to be importing everything from Islamabad and Lahore when we were in Shigar.
सही
So
है.
we had to work with what we had, and I think that was so beautiful. It actually makes life simple. You work with what you have, you use your sort of creativity, and there's a million ways of like using like even four herbs and what have you, and those there's a and then you sort of learn about all these sort of indigenous old knowledge systems, and again recipes and ideas and ways of being with they and you think about why have we stopped using them or incorporating them in our lives. So again, it's a thought process, and I think yes, there is an association with that. There is, if not a conscious, but at least some drive there to think that way and make sort of live a more sustainable life in that sense.
You know, it's amazing. I remember your kitchen in Shigar. जब हम वहाँ पहुँचे और मैंने सुबह पहुँच के जाके पहले तो खाना खाया बिकॉज भूख से मर रहे थे, लेकिन जब उस किचन को जाके देखा है, I really couldn't figure out how you created and served the food that you did in this one little room that was not much more glamorous than a cowshed. It was like a little mini barn. I mean, just thrown together. So it was this incomplete, in process, कहीं ब्लॉक है, कहीं सरिया है, कहीं कुछ है, एक बीच में एक मेक शिफ्ट सी टेबल थी, कोई 2-2.5 किस्म के चूल्हे थे. Now, I'm not a kitchen oriented person, so I looked at this and I just thought she must have a catering system जो खाना इसको दे रहा है, because यहाँ कैसे बना रही है और कोई मदद भी नहीं है, अकेले आराम से गाते हुए. एक वो असिस्टेंट है छोटा सा, एक घर से थोड़े दिनों के लिए खानसामा आया था, और गाना भी हो रहा है और शायरी भी हो रही है, लोग चीजें गुनगुना रहे, and then this like Michelin star style presentation and food appears, and it just makes you think about, really makes you question कि हम जो इतने फैंसी घरों में रहते हैं, इतने फैंसी किचन्स बनवाते हैं, मैं लोगों के लिए बड़े बड़े फैंसी किचन्स बनाता हूँ, उसकी एक्चुअली कोई जरूरत नहीं होती, बिकॉज यू हिट द नेल ऑन द हेड. It's really about a state of mind and a way of being. And I think that way of being, in a sense, is what you and I, and pardon me if I'm moving into your space, but I believe that we are both exploring. In my terms, it was the past ways of being. In your terms, you're living that way of being. So yours is a real time, uh, let's live like that and see what it's about. And what we do is go back in time and try and figure out how they used to live in those days, right? So we're almost oscillating between two sides of the same coin, in a sense, right? You're living it, and I'm trying to like dig it up from a sort of building architectural manner, history. What would you define is a nomadic way of being today for you guys as Khanabadosh in this socially defined unstable environment, which is only unstable now because that's how we've defined it. It wasn't unstable 3 years ago, 30 years ago, sorry, 3,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago. ये तो आज के हमारे लिंग्विस्टिक लिमिटेशंस हैं, कैपिटलिस्टिक ज़माने के, मटीरियलिस्टिक ज़माने के, कंज्यूमर मार्केट के लिमिटेशंस हैं कि उसको कह देते हैं कि भाई आपकी ज़िंदगी बड़ी अनस्टेबल है, आपको नहीं पता कि आपके घर खरीदा जाएगा कि नहीं, कि गाड़ी होगी कि नहीं, बच्चे होंगे कि नहीं, आपको पता ही नहीं कि 6 महीने आप कहाँ रहेंगे. भाई क्या फर्क पड़ता है, आप लोग खुश हैं, जिंदा हैं, इतना पैसा कमा रहे हैं कि जिंदगी उससे गुजर जा रही है. And what else does one need, really? So, how would you define that? So, nomadic as you're living it in the digital age, because that is our reality.
Yeah.
What is that way of being for you?
What is that way of being for me? Again, it's a process. I'm not sure. I mean, I think about we're not your digital nomads either, but we do depend on on technology to at least invite people to where we are, to share what we're doing. Otherwise, it will just be me and Emma doing whatever we're doing, and only the people we go to would know that we were there. So there is that dependence on technology, if you will. What it means to us, in what way do you, I mean,
in general, how would you define a way of being? What would you say is, if I was to look up in the dictionary written by you, and I came to the section in W that said way of being, what would your 3 lines be?
That's a very, this is something we think about often. Like, what does this mean? I mean, I'll be very, this is something that we also question, that is this really sustainable? Like, as sustainable as it seems in theory, simple, right? Like, you move, there'll be something there, you work with it, then you travel along, go somewhere else in the summers, come back south in winters. But then again, so nomadism takes away that idea of sort of growth as we know it. So for now, it's a lot of unlearning for us, to be very honest. For me to really define it as anything very sort of precise right now, I'm not sure, but there's a lot that we're trying to unlearn, a lot that we're trying to understand how much is important, how much stability does one really need. I mean, I was also sort of looking up nomadic tribes as they used to be in history along the Silk Route, maybe, for instance. How they sustained themselves. So they would buy things of other communities and other cities, and then for the Silk Route, they even made cities which were kind of pit stops for travelers and traders along the route, which kind of resonated. Well, not a city, but just sort of this movable settlement. But yeah, so to be honest, I don't have a very clear-cut answer for this, like what it means, unless there's something that that's not coming to mind. But
that's actually exactly the answer I was hoping for, because if you knew precisely what that way of being would be, you'd have shot this whole process in the foot. So you've
Thank God.
actually answered a very difficult question, I think, because it was kind of like a trap that said that, you know, she's talking about this sort of like completely open-ended infinity horizon where anything can change at any point in time, and the kind of courage and bravery it requires, and the energy it requires to be able to maintain that in a sustainable manner, right? So you said unlearning, it's an unknown, it's about a journey, it's about um, not really defining destinations. So that whole way of being is really, what is it? Is it a language? Is it
It is a very spiritual journey, I have to say. It
right,
takes a lot.
right. So
It's at the end of the day. That's one thing. The one sort of constant or one sort of go to, or I don't know, sort of one adjective that I can apply to it is that it takes a lot of faith. At the end of the day, sort of knowing that this is who you are, and you are your compass and your axis and everything, and you have these set of skills and a set of maybe knowledge, and everything else will come from others or from the environment, the physical environment where you are, and the people you meet. And when you do sort of surrender to that, things present, and opportunities, they present themselves. It's a very difficult, again, journey. It's all easier said than done. It's very emotionally taxing sometimes, but it, I think, at the
yes,
end of the day,
sure.
faith, and you have to, again, really sort of come back to your center somehow. So that's all I can say for
So
it.
there's two words here that you've said which are very intriguing to me. One is, what is spirituality? And two, what is compass?
So
What
where
is
do
a
you go
compass? Why
from
do
here? Where do you go from here? Where is home? Especially when you're moving around and when you were born in a certain house. I mean, for instance, I tell people that I don't have an ancestral home that I can go to. You know, the Nana Dada ka ghar ki chutiyon pe wahan jayenge. I had one that one was sort of brought down because someone wanted to make a plaza there. So I don't have that
right?
sense. And we moved houses a lot, and a lot of us have lived those lives. Um, but you know, I think it's a very human thing to want to maybe have a home, um, but um, is it possible to not, for that home to not be a house? Can it be more than that? Is it more than that? So maybe that journey kind of requires a compass, so to speak. So or in terms of Khanabadosh Baithak, so where do we go next? What do we do now in absence of a structure and a curriculum of sorts? Yeah, so I think that's why I use a compass in terms of, yeah, just where to go from here. Do we go this side? Do we work with this set of, I don't know, settle in Sindh or go to the coast, or so things just, I don't know.
So
I'm
I
sorry,
mean,
I a lot of I don't know, because really we sort of, it's a very intuitive process at the end of it.
yeah, and that's its beauty. I mean, that's exactly its charm, its magic, and its beauty is that even for those of us who know you and who want to attend the next Khanabadosh Baithak, wherever it'll be, we actually also don't know. So your community, if you wouldn't mind playing Pied Piper for a minute, your community of followers, all of us who also aspire to that level of freedom, and we use your lives almost voyeuristically to connect with, you know, for a few moments, and come back with this flavor of this sense of freedom and this sense of escape. And then we come back to our normal mundane lives while you continue on a daily basis. You know, it's so interesting that Jean, yes, one of the things she said is the buildings we consider sacred today were not sacred when they were built necessarily. They were part of everybody's lives. So, you know, it's the same with you. Like what you do seems very special and sacred in many ways to us who don't have those lives. But for you, it is your life. And I'm not sure why you want to define something sustainable separately. I mean, what you're doing, I think that's its sustainability, exactly as it is. Nahin?
It is. I mean, of course, because we get asked a lot of questions. So we sometimes wonder, and then we also think that maybe we should sort of have some sense to it and some sort of conventional sense to it, that we are. I mean, we have used the term tent and breakfast for the campsite setup, but I know that that doesn't define the sort of whole sort of breadth of what we do or why Khanabadosh Baithak is there. Um, um, but we do that just to sort of make it a little relatable. So it's a questioning process. Yeah. So no, not trying to make sense of it, but just learning with it. And I think for us personally with Khanabadosh Baithak, which is something that we want to take to others also, before I sort of forget about it in this sort of ether of it, is that we're doing this also to to understand. Maybe this relates to the compass idea, the idea of identity as a Pakistani. What we have been told in our textbooks by our parents. A lot of our cultural history has been denied post-partition, or due to, I don't know, religion, various factors. So just sort of getting a sense of what, again, and this is something that you do with the edu tours as well. So there's actual physical proof out there in buildings as inscriptions or images, as smaller communities that we don't know of. There's a lot of that knowledge out there, which we can still learn from, and then maybe connect dots, and then meet people who would know more about it, and then connect with people, I don't know, cross border, or I don't know, watch a documentary, read a book, and figure out what it really means to be part of this geography. Because we have also wondered if Khanabadosh Baithak is something that is Pakistani only. I'm not sort of trying to put a very sort of nationalist frame to it, but just like this geography, we are Behral from here, and there are multiple sort of influences that have come and gone, and that will continue to come and go. But can Khanabadosh Baithak be something that can exist outside Pakistan? I don't know, but that's But for now, I think it's very important for us to know that. So, for instance, in Ahmed's case, being a Punjabi, sort of, he has only recently connected with the idea that Guru Nanak's influence in Punjab, how क्या नाम था, मैं भूल रही हूँ, the Pak Patan में Baba Farid की poetry has a lot to do with the Granth. So things we're not aware of. Things that create distances between cultures only because you think that no, this is not ours and this is ours, and etc., which is part of what we explore and try to learn. And when people come to us, we try to expose them to it as well in whatever little way we can.
So interesting, you mentioned cross-boundary, short-term transient footprint for Khanabadosh Baithak. So if we look at the kind of ancient maps that I follow, those footprints take us back all the way to the Baltics on the western side and up to Mongol China on the eastern side. And your existing culture of Khanabadosh Baithak, whatever you have that's been created here because of your ingredients for the recipe, right? You said we use what we have. So you've created your own culture given the restrictions of what you have here, or given the opportunities that you've had to celebrate, right? We flip that restrictions to the other side. Now, if you were to move from here to a sort of landscape equivalent, middle of nowhere, outside Kabul, or outside of Samarkand, or outside of Prague, your ingredients would change, the recipe would change, but I'm assuming that the attitude, which is a word you used a little while ago, the attitude towards the way of being and its spiritual form of acceptance and surrender, these are all words, Baneen, you've just used. That culture, that philosophical culture that you and Ahmed share would remain intact. Sahi?
I think so. I would like to think so.
So then what happens? Then how do you then define identity? Then what happens to identity?
I guess, I mean, there is a relation to your land somewhere. I can't put my finger on it, or will probably not be able to define it. But there is that association with that place where you spent your childhood, if I can just boil it down to that. And everything sort of that connects with it, which cannot be taken away. For example, I can talk about the filmmaker Abbas Kiarostami, who was sent to exile, and he made films in French and in I think it was Japanese, if I'm not wrong. But he spoke about how Iran was very much part of it, and whatever his sensibility was, he would apply it to wherever he went. Be it France, be it Tokyo, be it wherever he worked. Um, and that sensibility had probably everything to do with him being an Iranian, and his probably having that exposure with Persian poetry and literature. And these are all things, again, that I've gathered from his interviews. So again, the way we think, there will be a certain sort of color to this that philosophy is there, but it has a certain tint, right? It has a certain sort of Eastern tint. The music that we listen to is not jazz, which is um, it's a very specific kind of music that we listen to so far. So I'm guessing, I don't know. I mean, it's possible to apply it there, but we'll see if that how if I don't know. Maybe identity is also movable, and again, it boils back to sort of yourself and your body, just like your physical being, because that, in theory, that idea of I've been saying your own compass and your own axis, which is where you get your identity based on wherever you are, comes in. So again,
So, we talk about at the editors, we talk about identity as being a multi-layered, multi-genetic. We define diversity as what you said, a lot of color, right? So it's not a tint of color, but it's a lot of vibrant colors all mashed together, because the geography that you talk about, which is today's border-based environment called Pakistan, was once all about the River Indus, right? And our identity is a comprehensive composite of everybody who's been through here, which has and left bits of themselves in me as much as they've left in you or Ahmad or whoever, right? So is identity something that moves through millennia, or is it a spiritual moment in time? Because, I mean, for instance, my childhood has been spent in so many different places, yet after all of these years, the longest time that I've now spent in one country in this last 10 years has been Pakistan. So it's, like homing pigeon, I finally come home. But then you've just said home and house is movable, it's nomadic, it could, it's state of mind, right? Home is where your heart is, essentially. तो फिर अब उसमें अगर होम भी आपका मूवेबल हो गया और आइडेंटिटी पे मूवेबल हो गई, तो फिर स्पिरिचुअलिटी का कंपास कहाँ गया? Like, what is spirituality then within this framework?
उसका compass फिर आप हैं, I guess, आप खुद.
Right.
I mean, of course, it's something that I'm thinking about. I can see this one comment here. Adnan Sayed, I think, complete immersion is in a particular identity is probably important before a transference could take place. And again, going back to Kiarostami, who said that, again, he was working within a framework where there were a lot of cinematic restrictions on filmmakers. And he spoke about transcending all of that. But to transcend, he said, you have to really deeply root yourself somewhere for the tree to sort of really, the tree will go as high as it is rooted below. So that is, and by becoming very specific is when the message kind of becomes universal. But again, where do you root yourself and where that home is, what yes, identity is very multi-layered. It's also in some way changeable. Your identity has built over time. Our identities are being built over time. We weren't always nomadic in that sense. We weren't always running Khanabadosh Baithak. But this is something that, again, going back to Jean's idea of the three brains, this is where what we wanted, what felt right, and what could sustain us was sort of all coming together in this idea at that particular time. So we're going with that. And so far, yes, I think that this geography is the framework with everything that has historically perhaps traveled through it, which is again a lot to, there's a lot of references there also. But yeah, so just navigating through that. So we're continuing to understand and grasp and just explore. So these are interesting questions. I mean, I wonder.
ये देखें आप जरा लिखा है, his interesting quote has just come through. I didn't mean to interrupt you earlier. Home is not where you were born. Home is where all your attempts to escape cease.
Yes.
What are your thoughts? Thank you, Fareed.
Yeah, so I mean, we're no longer anywhere near where we were born. And again, I guess this idea of Pakistan, this geography is also something that we were born into, right? So we start there. So that itself is like the community or the land or the gaon or the place that we would settle in for a particular season, for instance. This land, this country is our given for now, is what I know. And within that, there's everything that there is to know about. So unless we sort of travel, as I guess there's, yeah, more than identity, perhaps this is our given. This is our sort of, this is our land, environment. This is what we have. I mean, you know, we do live in a world with borders, and we have to be a certain nationality, etc., etc. I mean, I can't just like take my camps and sort of my luggage and what have you and cross border and start working in Iran. I mean, I can, but then that would require a certain procedure, and then I would also wonder, why am I doing that? So far, I don't think whatever intuitive process we follow with Khanabadosh Baithak, that time hasn't come. So maybe we are still, like that comment said earlier, you have to really immerse yourself wherever you are in that given first before you move on. So yeah, I guess identity sort of moves with you in that case.
So that would be, for instance, I mean, that, you know, if you're now talking about a legacy and you say, okay, bhai, in our lifetime, we've hit this idea of Khanabadosh Baithak at this point, and, you know, if we had started this when, you know, I'm just assuming that if you would have started this when you were 12 or 15, you know, like 30 years later, it would be at a different point in its evolution. You guys have started 4-5 years ago. So another 10-15 years, it'll be a different place in your evolution, and maybe your children will take it to the next level, and then their children will take it to the next level, and maybe after a quote unquote sufficient amount of immersion through 3, 4, 5 generations of you, maybe people will then say, let's now start looking at the edges, and then what's on the other side of the boundaries, and what came from there. So the process being, again, back to the slowness, following the same breadcrumb trails back as I'm doing, but in a living experience, right? It's you're actually doing it. You're not just looking at the theory of it like I'm doing. So I think that would be a fantastic curriculum. You know, it's a terrible word, actually. Curriculum is it's an awful word. Like, I don't really know what it means, and why do we have to keep using it? But I don't know what the other word would be. You know, for now, for a functional
framework,
for the purpose of this conversation,
yeah,
I think we need to redefine curriculum and learning. And learning probably needs to be redefined as unlearning. To learn is to unlearn. And to educate is not to impart knowledge, but to share, right? So I think our paradigms have to be redefined And I think that you guys are doing that redefinition by living it.
Possibly. I think it's also,
Adnan,
in a way, there's a rebellion there. What's that?
I was just reading what Adnan said before you kicked in. An analogy to consider could be the saints of the subcontinent who would be guided or directed where they would have to go. That'll move on, perhaps, guided by their own faith and spirituality, which is going to be my next question to you. But anyway, go ahead. Go ahead with your strain of thought.
I don't know what I was going to say, but this is yes. I mean, more than me, Ahmed would sort of use this, that, you know, wo jagah mujhe bula rahi hai.
Right.
So, I mean, that is something that we factor into sort of decisions about how we move. Again, okay. So what I was going to say is that we're also looking at, I'm reminded of something that I read by Charles Correa about how, you know, the symbol of schools and education in the Western world is a box with a red roof and all of, like, you know, that's where you go to school, as opposed to the Eastern symbol of sort of your guru sitting under a tree and the guru shishya sort of relationship, that which is very Eastern or Indian, at least, of the subcontinent. So again, there's been a frustration with that also, with either having gone to universities and not being satisfied with that journey, or not having had a good education for some people. Just the frustration, and sort of to rebel, you sort of pull yourself out and you go to the other extreme deliberately, so that you can then find that balance, you know, between what was imposed on you, what is then modern, what was indigenous, and what is how do you evolve. So this is our perhaps way of finding that that balance, if you will. I don't know if I've described that too well, but in trying to understand what, again, the knowledge that we were given, the conditioning that we grew up with, and what felt right, also what felt missing. So we were like, let's just keep all of this aside. Let's try this, you know, which is the sort of 180 degrees of that stable, going to job, having a job, like 9 to 6, everything set up, and see where it goes. So again, I'm not saying that we really don't know if Khanabadosh Baithak is something that we will keep doing for life. Maybe our children will, in fact, turn around and say, you were stupid and you have ruined our lives as well. So so we don't know, but this is our unlearning and trying to find that whatever that balance will be. Maybe we will find home in the nomadism itself, and or not.
Do you know, बुलावे की जो बात है ना, I believe in that very strongly, because मुझे भी आता है बुलावा, this calling type thing. I can relate to that entirely. Do you think, when you look at your work, and what I mean by work is the coming together of your rebellion and Ahmad's rebellion as an entity, where you both discarded everything that society expects from you, and you're proving our social construct wrong by saying that there is an alternative that does function for a couple in this country within your socially accepted norms and within your socially unaccepted norms. This can still work. So
Yes.
Do you think that your work is almost a sort of like pioneering exercise, like Che Guevara's books were, or his thoughts, his philosophy? So instead of writing it down and getting into trouble and being arrested, you're living it. And if somebody is sensitive enough or aware enough, or has a radar that's looking for this kind of an escape from the world as we know it pre-pandemic. I mean, the pandemic is going to change everything anyway, but you started this much earlier. Would you say that your work can be described as a spiritual avant-garde?
I wouldn't use those words. Perhaps maybe others see it that way, but I
both
mean,
those words, you fail both of them.
We're very aware of the fact that you know, when we're doing our tours or at the campsite, we end up attracting a lot of people who are going through some kind of a transition in life. where they're in
Right.
this space of
Right.
unknown, trying to figure out what next. And a lot of times it has to do with social constructs that they are not able to fit in, and want to find like their space within it or outside of it, and sort of come make peace with it also. And I'm pretty sure there's some connection there. We get a lot of such people who would come and they would be like, we want to stay here for a month. So that energy is there. We haven't done that consciously, but I guess I can't say I'm the pioneer of this or that, but uh, our journey has been that, yes. So I'm not surprised that others can sort of relate or sense that. Um, and yeah, but
So it's
yes, I
almost
think
like you provide a halfway house or a space free of judgment for people to meditate, to self-reflect, and to be able to take some time through their own transition to have that transition be smoother and more acceptable, so that when they come out at the other end, having spent time with you, maybe they're a little bit stronger and sure of themselves.
possibly, possibly.
That's a huge service. That's a huge service you're providing that our education system isn't, our expensive therapists are not doing, our YouTube क्या कहते हैं, healers are not doing, right? So I mean, I think that maybe is it possible that you kind of like selling yourself short and actually are doing a much bigger project than you're even aware of?
Possibly, but yeah, I mean, this is our way of sort of staying rooted in that sense also, where again, um, why we started this and how this journey is important to us, staying true to those ideas rather than becoming, oh, this is. But yes, of course, we're aware, um, and we do want to keep on doing that. We do want to be that space where, again, if nothing else, like-minded people can come, and a community of such people can exist, to whatever end, whether they're creating something, whether they're just sort of finding strength in themselves to live the way they want to, or connecting more to their respective contexts, or cities, or earth, or their trees and house, or what have you. Yeah. And I think this is again something we haven't consciously or actively, but we try that whenever we travel. So we go to these places. We again, there's sometimes a lot of yearning in such communities to become the modern society that we have escaped, because they see, they again associate success with a bigger house and multiple cars and a certain kind of job, etc. So by us going there, we try to have that conversation, or we see that we want them to sort of take ownership of it also, that you have no idea, this is extremely important, whatever you have already. So for instance, in Vulcan, we see the agriculture dying out because the young ones want to go to school, which is okay. I mean, of course, education is there, but again, can we get education in different ways? I know that people who are talking about homeschooling and have been doing it also, but can we, again, the guru under the tree and the guru shishya concept and the old school idea of sort of just learning subjects that were relevant, or maybe skills, is that not enough? Do you have to go through this sort of colonial setup framework of education that was given to us, which the West itself is now questioning, etc., etc.? So there's all of that. I mean, of course. So yeah.
Yeah, there's much, and I think that we're at a great time. The pandemic, with all of its tragedies and losses, um, which are undeniable. It's also simultaneously we're seeing the earth being reborn. We're seeing animals explore their newly found freedom, where urban spaces had pushed them back and had taken land from them. And those animals are reclaiming these spaces. And now suddenly our relationship with the outside of our boxed lives are becoming more precious, becoming more appreciated, right? So hopefully when the world transitions and the earth finds its own balance, Mother Earth, Mother Nature says, enough. I'm going to have to do a cleansing and bring us back to that balance that you're talking about. That maybe the human species will be able to appreciate your language more when we come out of the pandemic and understand simpler uh, frameworks for success, simpler frameworks for happiness, simpler frameworks for achievement, right? Because that's what you're talking about, that you need very little. And what you
Yeah,
need, you
and
should pick
then
up from within a
find
1 kilometer
meaning
radius. You have to
in
import it.
yeah, and find meaning in like different values. Like
Yes,
not everything is
yes.
money and stuff, and also like the pace of life itself. Yeah.
So
So
I think
I
it's
think
what kind of,
go on.
I'm sorry, go ahead. No,
No,
no, go
no,
ahead.
nothing. I'm done. I'm
I
done.
think that it's obviously a much longer conversation that we will most likely keep coming back to through this series. But I think it's a really wonderful way for you to show people how to connect with the sky, with the universe, with spirituality, with unknown energies, how to bridle your intuition, how to listen to that silence of your intuition, how to block out the noise and clutter of modernity, which has really failed us in many ways. And the modern life has really kind of collapsed. And I think what you guys do at Khanabadosh Baithak is a great model for a very beautiful, poetic exploration of the self in a slow, organic, it's like a creative process that I guess it requires a lot of strength, like you said, it's emotionally draining also. But please keep in mind that you also, I mean, both of you have very fundamental, structured educational degrees. You've had that foundation to be able to look at and say, I don't want to be a part of this anymore.
Yeah.
Both of you, right? So it's
Yes.
not like you've come out of this whimsical, natural, organic, village-like environment and continued it. You've actually had something very concrete that you have said, no, we don't want to have anything to do with this, and redefined as a reaction more so than a response, right? Like you said, rebellion. So
Yes.
amazing. I think I'm hoping that Jean will pick up on this, and I'm sure you've given her a lot of things to think about also. And we'll pick up on it again next Monday. And then, of course, you and I can continue having this conversation about the paradigm of education and curriculum. I'm going to wind up now because we're out of time.
Yeah.
But Baneen, thank you so much. Our own favorite Pulan Devi in Pakistan, we adore. And follow. So thank you so much once again. मुझे already announcement background से मिल गई है. 155 minutes left.
Thank you.
So
Thank you
anybody
for
else,
having me.
it's been a pleasure.
For...
Anybody who has questions, please send them in to Baneen directly or Khanabadosh's Instagram
a lot
page.
of comments that we haven't read, but thank you for everything.
Thank you for the comments. Thank you for all the participation. And I'm going to say Khudafis to everybody. Baneen, thanks a million to you again. Giant hug to Ahmed. And we'll continue this conversation offline. Thank you, Adnan. Thanks, everybody else. Khudafis till next week.